On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Girish Mirchandani. He is the head of talent at WestBridge Capital. We're going to be talking about executive recruiting at different size companies and different stage companies. We're going to dive in and talk about what those needs are, what those requirements are. How do you deal with different founder engagement at different stages? And we're going to talk a little bit about cross-border buildouts. Girish, thanks for joining the show.
I'm super grateful to be here, Amir. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Absolutely. All right, before we start, just want to ask you, tell us what WestBridge Capital does.
Absolutely. So WestBridge has actually been around for over 20 plus years. We have about 7 billion in AUM, focus in the US India corridor. And we also have an office in Mauritius. So really three main offices. It's Mauritius, Bangalore, where a lot of our investments come out, focus in the India market, and then San Mateo, where I'm based. We're a crossover fund, and what that means is we have the ability to adjust based on market needs. Our core in North America is really B2B SaaS companies in growth where there's some product market fit, mostly around Series B, although lately we've been seeing some really great A opportunities and we've been going deep. But we also had an opportunity to invest in public markets in 2022 when the markets were really down. Private markets were really suffering, but the public markets were a great opportunity for us. So we were able to invest in public markets as well. Also wanted to highlight finally our India portfolio and US portfolio, although we're one fund, are very different. India being kind of a super hot economy right now, I'm sure you hear in the news, is very, very strong opportunities on consumers. We have everything from a chain of grocery stores to ride sharing to ed tech, some B2B SaaS, but North America here is primarily focused on different types of SaaS companies.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, sounds like you guys definitely have a lot of activity, and that's fantastic to hear.
Yeah.
On this episode, we're going to be talking about executive recruiting. And obviously, the executive search side has complexities of its own, different size, different stage companies. I guess let's just start at the top, right? So when we're
Yep.
looking at executive recruiting, and if we're looking at particular stages, just based on your experience, is there a stage that's a little bit easier or harder to hire executives for
It's
across
a
the
great
board?
question. I would say they're all hard because you want to go after the top talent, and the top talents always have multiple offers. So they're all hard. I think for a Series A company, the needs are going to be a little bit different. And the founder might not have as much experience hiring executives. They've hired a lot of engineers. Maybe they've hired a couple salespeople or marketing, but I'd say the founders might not have that experience. So it might need a little bit more, I wouldn't say handholding, but more being side by side working with them. For the Series B or C companies, they've done it before, so it's a little bit different, right? If that makes sense.
It does. It's interesting when you mentioned top talent. And I guess that's interesting because it means so many different things to so many different companies. I mean, you've probably seen this in your career. One candidate, one place is a no, another candidate someplace else, they're the happiest company on earth. That nuance, that subjectivity, when you're talking to founders, right? You're talking to people trying to hire at the executive level, getting them to understand being open-minded, being open to different types of candidates just because it might not fit what they had predisposed the type of requirement early on. How do
Correct.
you work with the founder to make sure that they keep that lens as wide as they can?
Yeah, we're actually going through that right now for a Series A company, and we had that call. Do we want someone exactly from, say, the cloud infrastructure world? Or are we open to the best athlete? My advice is this is such an important search, a VP of sales for a Series A company. This is a search you want to get right. I think Atlee was talking about it to go to the market. This is one of the hardest searches. One of the other podcasts you did, Atlee from
Mm-hmm.
Redpoint, saying it's super hard. So you want to get this right. And I think you get this right by frankly being more active. And how you do that is you calibrate. And I think having two buckets, one bucket one could be, for example, this one is cloud infrastructure. They've seen that scale from say 5 to 20 millions. They've seen that early stage growth, so they're not coming into like recruiting someone that was at Snowflake. But Snowflake at 500 million is a very different journey than Snowflake at 5 million, right? So someone that's seen that stage, and then domain experience being critical, but also optimizing for the best athletes with those characteristics. I think is going to be critical because you might find someone from security that could just be a great athlete and they might just need time getting up to speed in the product, but their athletic ability, their sales discipline, their motions, the ability to build a strong team are going to be kind of the overriding qualities that we might lean forward. We might lean in on rather.
Interesting. You know, I've actually talked a lot about this. I don't know if it's been on the show, but I talk to people about it's an alignment between, I call it the jockey and the race, but in reality, about the person,
Yeah.
the actual company, and the intersection. When you're working on these searches, and you mentioned side by side with a lot of your portfolio companies, when you're working and trying to identify the right person for the right fit, how much future thinking do you want to do? Because obviously, a startup at different stages will have different requirements, but also an executive churn isn't ideal. But how far
Yeah.
forward do you want to project? Like if you're at Series A, do you want to be thinking, well, this is the person that's going to get us a Series B and C and beyond? Or is it, listen, I've got to execute now. 2 years from now is a whole different problem.
I think having ideals are great, but what's practical is hiring for now and getting them to the next stage. You might not, and you see this a lot, right? There's primarily the biggest turnover in go-to-markets, VP of marketing, then you see VP of sales right after that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But hiring for now, because let's get the company to 20 million and then let's figure out what we need. So I'd say hiring for now, if you can have that future aspirational leader that's can take you all the way from say 5 million or 100 million, you're extremely lucky, but it's extremely rare. And those candidates that have done that might not want to go back to a $5 million company all the way to do that because they now might be wanting to play in a bigger arena and might want to do this for a public company. So I'd say hire for now and look for track records of success to optimize for risk, but hire for now. And then when you get there, you can figure out if that's the right person or you upgrade or you find someone new.
Yeah, I like your viewpoint, and I think it's interesting because you do speak to founders that are trying to solve for the now and the future, and you could see it when they're looking for the person. They're like, and you could tell that they know that they have this internal conflict, and it's hard, right? They don't
It
want to go
is.
through this process again. Like, who wants to go through, you know, 10, 15 hours, 20, 30 hours of searching and interviewing for another executive? I guess when it comes to founder engagement, you need them. They have to be involved. This is their company. There are times when, if they have not had experience at the executive search level, they're used to ICs, there's a different process. Getting them to engage at the executive level to be active in that process, that's maybe where you come in, or maybe a little bit of advice you have. But how do you ensure, or how do you communicate that level of engagement you're going to need for executive search?
Yeah, I'd say it's communication. Then I'd say it's setting up the right structure. So what I found, I'll give an example, which we're doing for two Series A companies that we've funded in the last year, where these were companies that were built their technology out of Bangalore, out of India. Then they're starting to commercialize in the US, but the CEOs are based here. And so now with the capital, they need to go out and scale, right? So they need sales and marketing primarily, sometimes CS as well. And that what we've done, it's worked really well, is set up weekly calls, be programmatic about it. And listen, all of our founders are extremely engaged, right? Our founders want to win. This is their baby. They want to see it successful. But some founders don't prioritize recruiting as much as others do. And it's not intentional. It's because they're so focused on all the other things, like making sure their product is great, they're getting customer feedback. But setting up a programmatic approach, what we found worked well is we have this one portfolio company where we do weekly calls. But I mean, it's not just myself and the CEO. It's we invite the whole team. So for example, it's the founder who's the CEO. We have myself, we have our go-to-market partner. So we're talking about sales playbooks, and also there's another qualification framework, another qualification filter when we bring candidates. And then we have two people from the investment team, including the partner that did that search and the principal that helped do that deal. And what we've found is you set up the weekly call, you're thinking about talent, right? And you show up to the call. Number two, early stage companies, A or B, you're always hiring. And so for this one, we're doing full team build outs and we get different perspective. And three, sometimes you're only limited by your network. I'd say I've been lucky enough to, work for executive search firm and been in recruiting for 20 years, but my network is limited by people I know. But my partner in Bangalore might have a great network for someone he went to at Wharton. For example, we did a search for one of our later stage companies, and the candidate was actually sourced by our go-to-market partner, someone he worked with way back in the day. And so it's bringing that whole team approach. And what it also does, I think, just wanted to add is it just creates this framework, and it also creates this programmatic evergreen approach that you're always hiring and you're always thinking about it, because you might, what also might happen, you might say, hey, we need a CMO 6 months out, but you can go to the call and say, I met someone great, you should just meet them now and build a relationship with them.
I love that. I think one thing I wanted to piggyback and ask you about is from the candidate perspective in this case, you're coming in, you have to understand the founder and what the founder has imprinted already on the organization, because that's not something you're going to shift immediately. And if you don't have that understanding as the candidate, that's going to be really hard, that comfort level with the founder. I guess if you could give some advice to executives looking on the market when it comes to at the startup level, understanding the founder imprint and understanding and being able to quickly gauge how imprinted it is, what the founder has already done and what might be changeable. Maybe if you could address that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, but listen, if they've been through a startup, they probably understand, right? I think at this point, we're trying to mitigate risk by hiring experienced entrepreneurs. So, number one, they probably understand it. Number two, I think it's for both sides. It's really spending time. Let's take it from the candidate's perspective, spending as much time you can with the founder and being proactive about it. Not just having those meetings or the demo and going through the 30, 60, 90 or whatever that happens in the process. It's getting to know the founder. Hey, I know that you like to hike. Would you like to go on a hike on a Saturday? And it's a great way for them to qualify if this is someone I always want to spend 5 years, and it's going to be 5 hard years, right? When you're trying to get those big customers, where you're trying to get that next funding round. And I'd say for the founder as well, I think one of the things I've noticed in executive search that founders are great at selling their vision.
Mm-hmm.
And they almost have an assumption like, my product is so great, you should want to be here and join me because I see this market in my brain and I see this massive debt we're going to make in the market. But sometimes you need to communicate that, right? Or you need to show why. And it's not just about, I know this isn't answering your question, but it's not just about, hey, we're going to give you this much equity. But I think a lost art today is that relationship that happens in recruiting and that happens organically. And the more a founder or a candidate can spend time or vice versa, the higher likelihood they can get off to a fast start because they're going through some of those onboarding
Mm-hmm.
conversations already, and then they build rapport. I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that actually answers the question, because I think really the question is based around when you do want to walk into these new roles, you're expected to make change. How much
Yeah.
change you're allowed to make is not going to be necessarily what you spoke about. Because you're right, the founder is great at positioning the vision, getting you excited. But then if you come in and you realize there's a lot of decisions that are pretty fixed, they're not really flexible on a lot of these, then it's a question of you understanding what your value is and will you be happy. And I think a lot of times that's from a candidate perspective, you have to evaluate that.
Yeah, we had a situation where the candidate did really well in the process, and the founder left the meeting saying, well, the candidate wasn't really super excited. And we said, how much have you really shared your real vision? Have you really spent time with him? And they went to lunch, they went through a product demo, and they both realized they just needed more time to understand what each side was thinking. And the candidate ended up working out, they ended up making the offer. But I think it's that extra step can make a huge difference. I was listening to another podcast that you have with Laura from Bain, said it's about doing the small things.
Mm-hmm.
These small things add up.
You know what? I remember that episode, and
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in that. I'm an ex software engineer in talent now,
Yeah.
and I can tell when those small things made the impact or not as a candidate. Like you just know what the recruiter has that little bit of vested interest in you, and is trying to find the right fit, and it's not just I just need to get to my metrics, whatever that is. When you're looking at the small things, just to kind of piggyback, when you're advising your founders, your portfolio companies, is there any advice you have for them, the little things that you're like, these are the difference makers when you're trying to hire executives?
Yeah, I'd say it's going back is really spend time with them, really give them the time. Don't rush the process. Make this year as important as getting a customer, right? As you would qualify a customer and try to win the deal, try to win the candidate as best as you can. Check in with them on a start texting with them and start engaging them and say, hey, listen, I thought you might, we're going through the situation right now. How would you handle this? And you're asking them for advice. And when you ask for someone for advice, it's obviously more powerful, right? You're giving them kind of the floor to share their thoughts. But I think that extra level of engagement, all those small things add up and it just builds a relationship. And that I think can make a huge difference than you're getting 0.25 basis, 0.25 more equity at another company.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
want to I want to touch on something because you mentioned you guys do cross-border build outs.
Yes.
You mentioned obviously CEOs that are based in the US, a couple of companies that are within the India portfolio that are now go to market. Talk to us a little bit about that complexity because I actually think a lot of what we're seeing, if you look at where funding is happening globally, it's just everywhere. So I think a lot of these cross-border build-outs are becoming more common. Talk to us a little bit about, your experience and kind of your learnings that you could provide.
Yeah, I'd think having we're lucky with one team, one platform approach. So when we do these calls that I mentioned, it's not just myself and talent. I have a peer in India. So for one portfolio company, we show up, we spend about an hour every Thursday morning. I mentioned the time change is it's 7 a.m. our time because it's 8:30 in Bangalore. Thankfully, the time moves forward next week, so it's going to go to 8 a.m., which is going to be great. But we're on one call and we go through every hire we make and we talk about what we like, what we don't. We don't have to go through the granular, but from a high level, what are some of the candidates? And also this allows us as a team to give the founders advice if they're maybe being too picky about something
Hmm.
and they need to see the big picture. Sometimes I can tell them that as head of talent, but if it comes from the partner that did that deal that sits in their board, it's a different kind of message that's heard, right? So really cross border it's been very effective for us. It's when we're doing full team build outs. I also think one interesting thought about India before was thought more for back office. We're doing things like we have a portfolio company that runs most of their SDRs from there. Their marketing comes from India. A lot of their partnerships comes from India. So really, I think the biggest challenge, frankly, is time zone, and then getting everyone on the same call together. But I think you get everyone on the same call together, focused on key hires that need to be made. I'm
Hmm.
speaking from my point, but key areas that companies need to go. I think a lot of magic can happen.
As you're kind of looking at it and you're looking at obviously there's a lot of differences in how companies are approaching talent. Some people want them geographically co-located now. Some people are very open to remote. When you're looking at companies that are actually looking at identifying the best talent just globally, it doesn't matter. We need the best talent. In this case, maybe it's split between India and the States. When you're looking at the challenge of making sure you can breach that culture and communicate the same values. Obviously, I think in technology that helps. But you do have to make sure that both parties are speaking very similar dialogues and references. I guess when it comes to that cultural aspect of, each country has a way they approach business, each country has a way they approach their time in the workplace, all those different things. When it comes to executives, talk to us a little bit about, especially on these cross-border build outs, some of those complexities.
Yeah, I'd say one thing about the Indian culture, if you that's especially coming out from now, the amount of before it was more just getting things done as a more effective cost model. The amount of entrepreneurship and visionary leadership that's coming out of there is really exceptional, right? The amount of businesses that are being incubated and built out of India. So I'd say someone with that cultural passion for building a business is going to be key. And then someone I think that thinks globally. Listen, we don't have a lot of our recruits are folks that grew up here,
Mm-hmm.
right? The CMOs, we're not looking for quote unquote culture executives that have worked for Indian companies, but they have that cultural sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
They understand what's it like having that immigrant mindset of wanting to win, right? And wanting to be part of that. So it's really more about the cultural sensitivity, that global approach. And it goes down to entrepreneurship, wanting to build something great together.
I like that. Yeah, I honestly, I think entrepreneurship is a universal language. I think
Yeah,
that's
it is a
actually,
universal language.
it's funny. Is before people would
Yeah.
go, if you're a software engineer, that's a universal language. Everyone codes very similarly. You could read somebody's, but I think entrepreneurship transcends that because I think somebody who's an entrepreneur in India, in Europe, in Asia, or in America, they understand how hard it is, and I think that in itself. I think that does well, and I think that's interesting because you guys are this one platform, one voice. I guess when you're looking at that and you're looking at how you guys work with your founders, that dynamic of having everyone be on the same page at the same time, so there's nothing lost in trans. I think that's immense. I don't know how every VC works, so I don't know. But in the case of what you're describing, I think that actually would help every founder in knowing that when they walk away, there's no confusion on what was just said. There was no confusion on any of the issues that are at hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one other thought is most of the SaaS companies that are commercializing, that are started there, want to commercialize here, right? If they're a global company. So they kind of already understand and want US based talent to help them capture frankly, the biggest market in the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All
Yeah.
right, Girish, I appreciate your time, man. I know you got to get back to
Yeah.
the day job. I do appreciate you coming on, sharing. If somebody
Thank you.
does want to reach out, absolutely. If somebody does want
Yeah.
to reach out to you to pick your brain on
Yeah.
something you discuss, what is a good way of connecting?
LinkedIn is always a great tool, and you can just email me. It's on the WestBridge WestBridgeCap.com website.
Okay. We'll make sure we include some links there for you. Again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing. So that's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think everything we talked about this episode regarding executive recruiting across different size companies, across different stages of companies, I think that was fantastic. We talked about founder engagement, keeping the founder actually involved and interested and actually going beyond just selling his vision. And we also talked about cross-border hiring. I think Girish brought up some great points of how that is a little bit different and how he actually approaches it in his team. So share this episode with somebody else who's going to benefit from it. I'd really appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Leave me a review for the podcast. I'd like to hear from you guys. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.